Today, I want to answer one of the best questions that I've received in a long time. A parent emailed me and they said, "Hey, Jonathan, I understand that boundaries aren't supposed to be punishments. You talk about that a bunch. But if my adult child simply ignores the boundary, then what? Right? Why would they listen?" I think that's exactly where a lot of parents get stuck. And that's why I want to talk about it tonight. Because a lot of times it feels like you only have two options. Either I punish them or I let them get away with it, right? I back down. But I actually don't believe those are your only two choices. Here is where I think the conversation changes. The purpose of a boundary isn't to control another adult, right? You can't make your adult child clean their room. You can't make them get a job. You can't make them go to therapy. You can't make them take responsibility on and on and on, right? Boundaries aren't about controlling another person. They're about getting clear on what you are responsible for and what your support is meant to accomplish. Support. Let's talk about support. That is what almost all of you listening are doing, right? You are supporting your adult child in some way. Maybe it's housing, maybe it's money, maybe it's paying for bills, maybe it's solving problems, maybe it's providing emotional support. The question isn't whether you're supporting them, the question is why? Is your support there to give them an easy, comfortable life where they don't really have to move forward? Or is your support there to provide an encouraging place where they can gradually build the skills they need to be responsible and move into their adult life? Because those are two very different things. Like, here's the reality: one way or another, your support is eventually supposed to come to an end. Now, let me be very clear, very, very clear about this, right? I'm not talking about your love. I'm not talking about your relationship. I'm not talking about your connection with your adult child. I'm talking about your financial support, your resources, your problem solving, your stepping in and figuring things out for them, right? That kind of support is supposed to decrease over time, right? It gets less and less over time. Ideally, you want it to end because they don't need it anymore, right? They're paying their own bills, they're solving their own problems, they're building their own life skills. But if that isn't happening, then support may also need to change because it's no longer being used for its intended purpose. Right? This is an important concept, an important way of seeing this, right? So instead of helping them move towards independence, if your support is helping them stay comfortable where they are, right, that's two completely different things. So, all right, here's an example, right? If your adult child is living at home, the conversation isn't like, "Hey, get a job or else." The conversation sounds different. It's more like, "We're happy to provide a place for you to live while you're actively working towards becoming independent. Our support is here to help you move forward, not to make it comfortable for you to stay stuck." Do you see the difference there? Right? The focus isn't on making them obey. The focus is on the purpose of your support in whatever form it is coming in. Now, this is where a lot of parents get stuck. Many parents, I think they're just still looking for the conversation that magically changes everything, right? They're hoping that if they can just explain it the right way, say the right words, their adult child's going to see the light, then everything is going to be different after that. And honestly, sometimes that does happen. You hear me talk about just the power of connection and the way you talk to your kids and how that can be enough. Um, because those are like these real, honest, loving, clear conversations. Right? So what happens is you you can have that conversation, and your adult child understands that they understand the situation differently, right? They realize that you're serious and they know that they have to start moving forward. And it comes out of that conversation and they start to change. But for a lot of families, that's not what happens, right? They need to have that conversation, but then there's this other part to it, right? So for what I see happen with a lot of these conversations is, instead of the child responding, their anxiety starts to set in, right? They start to get upset. They argue, they withdraw, they tell you you're being unfair. Maybe they become emotional, maybe they become super angry. And that's the moment where I see a lot of parents back down. They'll start the conversation with clarity, right? We've talked about it. They're preparing. They're ready for this conversation, and it starts clear. It starts in the right tone, and then they see their child becoming anxious, and then that's when parents start thinking, maybe I'm being too hard here. Maybe this is going to damage our relationship. What if they stop talking to me? What if something bad happens? Right? All that starts going through the parent's mind, and they start to soften. They soften the boundary. They delay it one more time. All right, one more chance. We'll back off, right? Uh, or they just flat out go back to doing what everyone was always doing. So here's the problem. In those kind of patterns, your adult child learns that if they push back long enough, if they get angry enough, if they get emotional enough, the boundary goes away. And that's a very difficult pattern to get out of, because they're not believing that they really need to move forward. And it's not because they're bad people, it's because they are anxious too, right? I mean, people naturally test whether a change is real, right? Am I really going to have to do this? And if they start believing through example time and time again that I really don't have to make the change, right? That becomes part of the unhealthy pattern. Now, a lot of times it's easy for parents to lose focus on the bigger picture, and I want to cover this, right? Um, I see where a lot of parents can spend a lot of their time and energy focusing on the smaller boundaries instead of the ones that actually move their adult child towards adulthood, towards independence. One of the most common examples I see, I mean, this is like really common. It's the messy bedroom, or, you know, household chores, things like that. Now, don't get me wrong, right? There absolutely can be expectations about helping around the home and tackling um, shared living space stuff, right? Those are important. And in fact, they're important life skills. If they don't know how to do that stuff, then those are important boundaries. But unless that bedroom is like a biohazard or is affecting everyone else in the home, I probably wouldn't make that the biggest battle, right? I'll say it this way. I have seen plenty of young adults with absolutely disgusting bedrooms, right? And bathrooms. They're living like a slob, but they're also working full time. They're going to school. They're saving money, right? They're moving towards independence. So the bedroom really wasn't the real issue. The bigger question is, are they moving towards adulthood? Are they taking ownership of their responsibilities? Are they actively building a life that becomes less and less dependent on you? Because those are the boundaries that have the greatest impact. All right, so parents often ask me, then what are the consequences, right? What are consequences? I actually think the better question is, and I want you to hear this, right? Rather than what are the consequences, it's what was the agreement? Because that's another place that I see parents get stuck, right? parents become reactive instead of proactive, right? Um, Reactivity sounds like this: oh no, they didn't do what they said they were going to do. They're not following through. Now, what are we going to do about it? Right? That's the moment where parents start scrambling, right? They're coming up with consequences, and those consequences often feel emotionally charged, inconsistent, and honestly like a punishment, right? Like, I'm upset with what you did, and now I'm going to punish you. I'm going to make your life difficult. Being proactive is different, right? It's having the difficult conversation beforehand, right? It's getting clear about what your support looks like, what responsibility belongs to your adult child. So, what are they actively working towards, right? And then what happens if they stop moving in that direction, right? So, you're not making up a response after the problem happens. You're agreeing on the arrangement before the problem happens, right? You're being proactive. So if your adult child stops following through, you're not inventing a punishment in that moment, right? You've already talked about this. There's already been an agreement, right? You're simply following through with what the two of you already understood the arrangement to be. Right? If the agreement was that you're providing support while they're actively taking ownership of their life, and then they stop taking ownership, then your support begins to change, right? It's not because you're angry. It's not because you're trying to teach them a lesson. It's because the purpose of your support is no longer being fulfilled. It's no longer being used in the right way. That's very different than a punishment, right? Punishment says, you upset me, so now I'm going to make your life harder. I'm going to make your life miserable. A boundary says the purpose of my support was to help you move forward. If we're no longer moving towards the goal, then we need to revisit what this arrangement looks like. So this conversation, it creates clarity, right? Follow Your follow through is what creates credibility. You see how that works? Right? Clear conversations with follow through create the credibility, right? And your kids will start to see a different path forward. Before, the path was, how do I avoid? How do I push back? How do I make this change not happen? Now the path is looking like, oh, all right, well, I really need to start moving forward. I need to start making some changes. I need to stop putting my energy into avoiding change and start figuring out how to make this change happen. That's really big, right? So when your words and your actions stay connected, your adult child learns you mean what you say. And yes, 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 yes. Many of you, for many of you, your adult children are going to test those boundaries. In fact, I'm just going to say it, you should go ahead and expect it on some level. So I don't want you to take that as a sign that you're doing something wrong. Often that's them trying to figure out whether this time it's different, right? Different from all the other times. All right, so now I want to acknowledge something else. Boundaries often don't feel helpful to your adult child, right? Especially in the beginning. And I see a lot of parents getting stuck with that, right? They want the kids to see the whole path. Like, thank you, mom, dad, grandparent. Thank you so much for setting these boundaries, these clear boundaries that are going to cause me to face the changes that I need to make because I know I'm going to grow from this experience. And I just already appreciate and have this deep, heartfelt love and appreciation for what you're doing for me, right? That's not how it happens. Um, in the beginning, they're probably going to think that you're being unfair. They might think that you're making life harder. They might get angry, get anxious, or even they're just like completely confused. Like, what the heck is happening here? Right? You're not giving in. You're Why are we having this conversation this way? But your boundaries are really about love. And you need to remember that, right? Your kids might not recognize it, right? Because it's not the kind of love that is easy to recognize, right? It's a hard conversation. It's a tough love, right? But it's the kind of love that says even when you're angry, even when you're uncomfortable, even when you're confused, even when you're anxious, I'm still going to do what I believe gives you the very best chance of moving forward into your adult life, your best life. That's a different kind of love, right? It's not always appreciated in the moment. Many parents don't hear those words until years later in life, right? Some may never hear those words at all, but there's something deeply satisfying about knowing that your boundaries played a huge part in helping your adult child move forward, right? You love them enough to help them build a life where they could eventually stand on their own. So when that day comes, right, when they're paying their own bills, when they're solving their own problems, when they're living their own life, you'll know your boundaries played a part in helping them get there. Even if you don't get that, thank you.